This spring, the people at Z Turf Equipment gave me a 2023 Z Spray. I've got the mid version. I've had the smaller Z Turf Equipment, the little LTS, the lean to steer. I've had a Permagreen. I've got a Ground Logic ride-on machine. But this is the first machine I had as far as a ride-on spreader sprayer that was like a bigger machine. Now they've got the Max and they got the Junior. I've got the mid-size one, mostly because I talked to my friend of mine who has a couple of them, and he has the mid, and he said it was a great machine, so I just went with what he had because I didn't have a lot of experience. But now that I've gotten a little bit of experience on this machine, let me just go ahead and say I'm not an expert driver at it yet, but I'm getting a lot better. I want to talk to you about some of the things I've learned about it. I've got 7 things jotted down that I'm going to go through about my experience so far with the Z Spray, and I want to give you some action of me riding this thing. All right, so here it is, the 2023 Z Spray Mid, and on this one, it was the first time that they really did a redesign on it since they acquired the Z Spray, since the people at Exmark and Z Turf Equipment acquired it. So mine has got a couple things on them. Let's go real quickly with you as far as a few of the features that were added on mine. Mine has an ISO tank over here, so this has its own separate pump and little spray wand. So what you can do with that is like put a separate chemical in there if you want to just spot treat nut sedge, let's say. Put a sedge product in there and you can spray while you ride, because it's ISO tank separate from the other things. This is an auxiliary tank, so this is basically an extra 7 gallons onto my already 40 gallons that I have that comes standard. So this is gonna pull through the same system and come out the boom here. And they've made a lot of improvements on there, and I've went over that in the other video. If you wanna search Lawn Care Life Z Spray, you can probably find the other videos on YouTube. But one of the things that this thing has done for me so far, and again, I'm learning how to drive it and getting better as I go. I spent a lot of time talking about small properties, how I like small properties. I still like small properties, okay? I think the profit margins are good on some small properties. For me, dealing with chemicals and things like that, when the cost of the chemical goes up, it's not as big of a deal on a small property because my margins are so good. Now, the small properties, you gotta have a lot of them compiled together before it makes sense. I don't want to drive 20 minutes across town for one little small property. But I'll tell you this, and my friend told me this that has a couple of Z Spray. He said, you know what, you got this Z Spray, you're going to be looking for some bigger properties. And he's sort of right. I will say this, now that I have some bigger properties, and I had bigger properties anyway, but like, for instance, I got one big industrial park. It's 120,000 square feet, and it's just a really big rectangle, and I'm telling you, it is so much easier with a machine like this. I've got a football field, I've got a softball field, things like that. This is unbelievable. But also some larger properties. So for instance, let me give you an example. This morning I woke up and I've got, I don't know, 15 properties to do today, which is kind of a light day. It's a Friday when I'm recording this. And I had a couple of them in my mind. I was like, that yard, I hate pulling a hose on that yard. And I got thinking, wait a minute, I'm gonna take the Z and I'm just gonna ride that yard, and it's gonna make all the difference. Got a big yard on a slight incline, wears my legs out. Sometimes you gotta to do half the yard, then wind in the hose, move the truck, do the other half of the yard, wind in the hose again. So anyway, on those type of properties, the Z Spray has just made a huge difference. So definitely opened me up my eyes to larger properties. So that's the first thing I want to mention with my experience so far with the Z Spray. Let me hit the road. I got some yards to do, try to get you some footage, and I'll be talking to you throughout the day on some of these other things that I've learned after having my Z Spray. I'm about 8 yards into my day here, and I wanted to mention one thing I like about the Z Spray, but let me just preface it with this. I didn't have the older model Z Spray. The 2023 that's been redesigned is the one I've had, but I have found this thing particularly user-friendly. Now, it does take time. It's user-friendly, but anytime you get on something, like if you drive a zero-turn mower, and this one feels just a little bit different than that one. So let me just give you an example. I'm gonna stand up here on and show you some of the controls. All right, one of the things that I like about this one, I know people that have the older model may be different, but supposedly on the newer model, this is an improved foot button. So I use the foot button a lot. So the way I do, I'll set up my controls here where I've got the foam marking kit on here, so it puts bubbles out as I'm going. So I set it up to where when I press the foot pedal, it puts bubbles out for the foam marking kit, and it also sprays the lawn. When I release the foot pedal, it stops doing both of those. So it's not very complicated, okay? You just gotta know which one of these controls the foam marking kit, which one of them codes the spray, and then this one over here is my ISO tank, and then you got these then you got these over here. So if I pull all three of these up, it's going to be spraying out of all three nozzles on the front. Now, if I just want to use one nozzle, I can flip two of them down or use two of them, or what, you know, however you want to do it. So sometimes people will drive it with one hand, control the nozzles, or they'll spray one, things like that with the other hand. This one over here sprays off the hose reel coming out of the same tank. So if I want to spray off the hose reel, got to flip those down, flip those up. Okay, so I mean, it's pretty easy. It just takes a little bit of time to get used to it if you're not familiar with the machine. Now, the other thing I want to mention is this machine is pretty good on hills as well. I have some hills in my area. You might look behind me, I'm about to spray this yard, and it's a hill. Now, I don't have any doubt in my mind that I can go sideways on the vast majority of this hill. If it gets too steep, I could park the machine and use the hose reel. But it does hold hills well, and they do have these locking front casters where if I'm going sideways across the hill, I can lock those front wheels in to help keep me straight. I don't particularly use that feature a lot, but it is there to help with that. I think one of the big improvements they've done is just lower center of gravity, bigger tires, you know, and the way the tanks come down real low like that to be able to help it hold the hills better. So again, I live in an area where there's a lot of hills, and I've been impressed so far with the ability to hold a hill. Now, I'm not going to do anything crazy on this machine, or at least I haven't yet. If it's on a steep hill, sometimes I just pull the hose and spray it that way. But it is one of the improvements they made was better stability on hills. The third thing I want to mention about the Z-Spray that I've learned, and this was honestly my biggest concern using it regularly on spraying. It wasn't necessarily how it would handle hills and everything, but for me, it was like, how do I get very close to the shrubs without getting it on the shrubs, you know, because with a handgun, I can get right down there close to it. So let me tell you what I've learned, and this has come from talking with people and also from my own experience. One advantage is the boom and the sprayers, the nozzles here, are fairly low to the ground and they spray downward. So there's not a whole lot of drift. The other thing is because the boom sticks out wider than the wheels, at least on this model, it's very easy for me to see exactly where it's spraying. And it does come out slightly wider than this. So it's going to spray a little bit at a downward angle wider than this. And so when I'm making passes back and forth, this is where the foam comes out here. I'm going to line up the foam dots about 10 inches apart because it does come out further and you want a little overlap. So as I'm going along the edge of a flower bed, I want to spray right up next to it. I can get pretty close without getting on the shrubs. Now, of course, that's not an issue if the shrubs are backed away, but you know how sometimes people plant the shrubs and they're right up against the edge, sometimes even hanging out in the yard a little bit, which is not exactly convenient. The other thing that I've done, and one came from talking with an experienced user, actually two experienced users. One guy told me, he said, I use my ISO tank. I'll put the same exact mixture in my ISO tank. And what he said he'll do is he'll drive the machine with one hand right here. And he's got his other hand, which mine's on the camera right now, but he's got the other hand on the wand. And as he's driving, he's spraying along the side up against the perimeter. And then he can come back. He just got to spray, you know, 6 inches or so. Then he can come back and spray the rest of it out of the boom. Another person said he basically does the same exact thing, but he's using the hose here and the sprayer that comes off of the hose reel. I found that to be what I have been doing. I'll drive it with one hand and then I'll hold, in the other hand, I'll hold this and spray along the perimeter enough to where then I can go back and forth with the boom without worrying about getting on anything close. The other thing I had to learn when I got this was the speed, and that was a big deal because when I got it and I was out here on my own property, wide open spaces, and I was spraying 6-7 miles an hour, no problem. But you know, if you calibrated that and then you get on a yard that's got hills and bumps and obstacles and things like that, I found out that it was very difficult to drive the thing 6 or 7 miles an hour while spraying and concentrating on what you're doing. So one of the things that's handy is on this back of this seat, which is attached with magnets and hooks. If I pull it over, which I'll do for you, if I flip it around, which I'll do, they've got this handy calibration diagram here. And I've got these lavender tip nozzles, and you'll see the ones that are highlighted there under the lavender. It's got 40 PSI at 5 miles per hour is 14.9 gallons per acre. Well, I can see why they've got that highlighted because that's actually a pretty good speed for me. I've got the lavender tips, I've got it at 40 PSI, and I'm driving it comfortably at 5 miles an hour. So just understand, if you're out there driving in wide open spaces, yes, it'll drive 10, 11 miles an hour probably, but that's not a very good operating speed for actually spraying a yard. 5 miles an hour has been great for me. Now, the other thing on the speed is sometimes people will loosen up these knobs right here, and you can move this bar here where you can lock it in at 5 miles an hour, where it'll only go up to whatever speed, or 6 or 7 or whatever you want to. So I could just have this bar come down where I could only go 5, so you can have a steady speed. I personally have chosen not to do that. I find that with a little bit of experience, it becomes pretty easy to know what 5 miles an hour feels like. Plus, you have your speedometer right here, so I can check it. Oftentimes, I'll be riding on a yard, I'll look over it and say, what do you know, I'm going 5 miles an hour, or 4.9 or 5.2, but at least close enough. And so I found that I didn't need to lock the bar in. The advantage of not locking the bar in, the advantage of locking it in, obviously, is being able to set that speed. But of not locking it in is you can go faster when needed. Like if I want to go back to the truck and I'm done with the yard, then I can floor it and get back to the truck quicker. The sixth thing I want to talk about is large properties versus small properties. And we talked about that a little bit. You know, I've got my gram spray rig in the background, and a lot of times on a little bitty yard, I'll just get out there and I'll just spray it with that, and I'm back in the truck, no problem. But what I found on the big yards, it has really been a time saver. I did a yard today that normally is a real pain because of having to move the truck and drag the hose and move the truck and drag the hose and move the truck and drag the hose. And with the Z-Spray, I was able to knock it out without getting tired at all, because I'm not walking or anything. I'm just riding on the machine, but also just not worrying about having to continue to wind in the hose. So on the big yards, it saves a lot of time and energy. On the small yards, I know a lot of people that say they'll use their Z-Spray on any yard, whatever size they can fit it on. I think that's just a personal decision. Sometimes it might take longer to unload the trailer, get the machine off, spray the yard and put it back, than to pull the hose out and spray it that way. But I have also talked to somebody, he said, you know, if you've got a neighborhood and you've got 10 yards in that neighborhood, you might just unload the machine, go drive the machine through the neighborhood, spray all your 10 yards, and then come back. That's not a bad idea either. And the last thing I want to mention is, yes, it definitely saves your legs. I mean, I'm not old, but I'm not as young as I used to be, and I do get tired, you know, so I think this thing is great, especially on these big properties, because of the extra energy I have at the end of the day. And ultimately, you got to think about it. You know, I made a short video recently where I talked about slowing down after lunch, and that's true. Sometimes after lunch, I have a big meal, I slow down a little bit. With the machine, you talk about steady performance, whether it's you or an employee, because you're not tired at the end of the day and the machine doesn't get tired. So there are a lot of advantage to it. Again, as I try to be honest in this video, I am learning to operate the machine. I'm a good operator. I remember operating a skid steer one time, and I could make it go, but then I saw somebody who was really good on a skid steer, and I thought, wow, that person's really good on it. So I am in training, okay? I'm out there spraying yards, but I'm hoping as I get more time logged under my belt that I'm gonna be an expert riding on this machine. But overall, I've been very pleased with it and hope this video has been helpful for you to understand a little bit more about the Z-Spray machine. Thanks for watching. If you hadn't done so, subscribe to the channel. I also want to mention the 2024 Lawn Care Life Conference coming up February 23rd and 24th in Springville, Alabama, which is near Birmingham. You can go to lawncarelife.com and click on the conference link. You'll find details. You can register for $197, the early bird special. That includes your meals, Friday night and Saturday. Looking forward to that. That's also where you'll find the information about the Weed Control and Fertilization Academy. If you want to get into weed control and fertilization like me, especially if you're dealing with warm season grasses, then a lot of people are taking advantage of the Weed Control and Fertilization Academy. Thanks for watching. We'll see you guys in the next video.